everyone. Welcome to another episode of Write, Publish, Connect. My name is Aaxel Nazzaro, founder of the Aaxel Author Group. And today I have the pleasure of speaking to one of our authors, Dana Diaz, author of Gasping for Air, her very riveting memoir. And welcome, Dana. Thank you so much for being on our little show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this.
Well, your writing journey has been really exciting, as well as everything you've been accomplishing after publication. Let's go back to the very beginning with the whole writing process. Tell us a little bit about, the source of inspiration for this memoir and what it was like to write it.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually came from my story is of my former marriage, which there were multiple abuses and physical manifestations of my mental angst, and I just felt a real responsibility to share that with the world when it was over. And what had happened towards the end of that marriage was I was keeping a journal. I was actually in unsafe circumstances and COVID hit. So not only was I unsafe with this man, but I was also trapped in a house. So I started keeping a journal, not a pretty leather journal that we want to write our feelings. It was some random notebook from my son's like fourth grade year that I had, I rip out the pages that are unused or that are used. And I was writing on the unused pages because it was unsuspecting. I couldn't have it caught. But I was writing down all these things that were happening, just quick little blips for my own memory. I was being gaslighted, told things didn't happen, I'm crazy, all this. So it was more for me to make sure that I knew what was what, and to make sure that if anything happened, that, people would know who did what to me. But I kept this under the couch cushion in my basement because it could not be discovered. And when everything was over and I was safe again, I just realized that this was really important for people to know what's happening behind closed doors, because I started, getting out on the internet and listening to podcasts. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. So that's basically how the book came to be. Was I took this journal and I just started elaborating. And I think it was mostly for myself. At first I joked calling it Rantings of a Mad Woman, but I was crazed. I was traumatized. I had all these things in me that just I needed to get out for my own healing. But, thankfully you and I connected and we were able to put the stories in a format that are now going to help other people learn about their own circumstances and understand what is exactly happening without telling them what's happening. It's allowing people to relate on a level where they're not being told, but it's just kind of like holding their hands saying, I understand, I see you, I got you, but it's going to be okay.
Did you find, once you decided that this was a message you had to share with the world, did that psychologically, was there a shift in the way you viewed your writing? Because obviously it started as something deeply personal. And did you sense that there was a shift when, okay, I think this is a message that needs to go out, so that means it's going to eventually become a book? And so did your perception of your own writing change and the purpose behind it?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a degree in journalism that I didn't actually use in my life after I got it. But so I was trained more for like reporting. I thought I was going to be like a broadcast journalist and be on like, ABC News or something. But it's very different. It was actually, as you know, it's been a very challenging shift for me to write stories and describe characters and explain without telling, because I was trained to tell and inform. And now I had to insinuate and let readers, come to their own conclusions with it. And I'm still struggling with that as we are, trying to finalize books 2 and 3. But I love that I was challenged because as a writer, I think we all have our niche, we all have our way, we have a style. But yes, to try to tell my story in a way that people were going to relate to, I think that this was the way to do it. And I appreciate you guiding me to that decision, and you've been so patient with me on my coaching me and learning, with all the learning I have done and all the growth that, people are, the result is exactly what it should be, that people are relating, because people that are being traumatized or in bad situations, the last thing they need is, they already have people telling them, oh, you should this and this is happening. They don't need that. They
Mhm.
just want somebody to understand it. And we've been able to do that, and it's been so impactful. But yeah, the writing had to definitely change, and it's like I said, it's still challenging, but I would hope that anybody who writes, whether you are a professional writer or you're a novice and never wrote before, that you would be open to how your writing is going to be received, especially when it's so personal. And even if you're just telling stories about gnomes and fairies or whatever, it doesn't even have to be memoirs. I think that when you put this much work, because it's grueling and it's time, I mean, you're missing out on the rest of your life when you're putting this much work and this much effort into something. You want it to be received in a certain way. And in order to achieve that, sometimes you have to alter your idea of how it should be.
So you sort of, that's a very good segue into my next question about the whole editing process and revision process, because there are authors who feel, it's good. It's good the way it is. It's all right. I checked it out with a couple of friends and I feel good about it. So what advice would you give? And you already touched on that a little bit. So what advice would you give? And what was that revision process like for you? Was it, you mentioned it was grueling. Just tell me a little bit about that.
So it's interesting. There's a couple points on that. So initially, I'm laughing because I remember the very first manuscript I sent you. And then I got that manuscript evaluation back, and I think it was like 28 pages long. I mean, not that I'm not traumatized by that, but I was, like I had put a year and a half into putting this together, and I was crushed because I'm like, but I'm a good writer and
Mm,
I tried. And who writes a book? I wrote a whole book. There's all these feelings about it because it is very personal, no matter what you're
absolutely.
writing about. But I had to get past that. It took, I'm not going to lie, it took 2 or 3 manuscript evaluations for me to get to the point where I'm like, you know what? It's not personal. This is somebody, meaning you, who is looking at my writing objectively. It's not my friend. It's not my husband or whoever that's just cheering me on because honestly they couldn't write a sentence to save their life. Like it's a different perspective. And that's why actually I choose, and this is my second point, I choose not to allow people to read my writing. It's between me and you. I don't let, I mean, even my own husband did not read Gasping for Air until it was actually
Mm,
published. I think actually I
interesting.
let him read the first proof. And I liked that. I preferred it that
Mm,
way because people need to look at your writing objectively. Theoretically, our friends and family are going to be supportive of you. I have not necessarily had that in my life, but read the prequel and you'll understand. Um, but the thing about it is that every single sentence of your manuscript evaluations has provoked thought for me. Because especially, I can't speak to other types of writing, but especially writing a memoir. For me, I'm writing and I'm trying to provide backstory, but because it is my story, there's a lot of things that I have found in revising when I'm answering your questions or addressing things that you have mentioned in the evaluation, that it's like I just assumed somebody knew that, or I
mm,
assumed somebody knew that this had happened or this had been said. And so it jogs your memory like, oh yeah, now I'm rereading it and I'm like, well, how would anybody know this? Why would they understand how I feel about this or why I reacted to that? So in that same sense, and this is my last point on it, in writing a memoir, it was, you have been the best therapist that any girl could ever ask for, because writing is therapeutic in itself. So it was good to get things out and to be able to look at it objectively and see the patterns and make connections that, I mean, I'm 48 years old, and even with books 2 and 3, I'm still waking up in the middle of the night like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm just seeing something that I never realized before." Even this morning, as a matter of fact, I made another connection in my childhood that I was like, why is this happening?" Because I'm writing about it and it's bringing
Mhm.
things up. But your questions and the evaluations, well, what happened here? Or, maybe you should elaborate on that because I'm not sure how you're feeling. Well, then I have to think about how I was feeling in that situation. And it's really been helpful, not just for the writing, but for the mental health as well.
Okay. Um, so as much as you've been revising, there's also a point
Yes.
where as an author, you have to make a decision that this is it. I'm good with this. And so how for you, how did you know, you know what? I think I'm good with this draft because we all know writers, I certainly do. It's easy to get lost in drafts and revisions and rewrites. So at what was your strategy or approach for determining when were you ready to move on to the next phase?
I'm hesitating because with gasping for air, I would revise it right now, standing here right before, and we're actually a few days past the 1 year anniversary of its publishing date. That I would go back and revise so many things. There's so many things I would change. And I believe that when we were at the point last year when you said, "Is this it? Are we moving forward?" And I just had to trust you and myself and say, "Is this what I want out in the world?" I mean, did I think it was the greatest masterpiece? No, I am not Shakespeare. It is what it is. But I still feel that I would go back and change things. But when you had asked me that question, I believe I said something to the effect of, if I don't publish it, I will be revising it the rest of my
Mhm.
life.
Very true.
And that's the thing, is that I still reread parts of it. Or when I'm being interviewed, people might ask me to read, some blip of it. And I'll be reading it, and in the midst of reading it, like restructuring that sentence, or like that word doesn't need to be there, or why did I even write that? Why is this whole chapter even in this book? Like it could have gone without that. And there are things, even knowing, like my husband's sister started reading it, and I was like, oh, well, I shouldn't say what I was going to say, but there are things that you just don't want some people you just don't want some people to know. And they weren't necessary to the story. And I realize that now, even after publishing. So moving forward, now that we're looking at putting books 2 and 3 out, it's just, you just have to trust yourself and trust, like, is this what I want out there? Is there anything more that I can say, or anything that isn't really, it might be relevant to me, but it's not really relevant to the reader or the story? Or, what I have a problem with is slowing things down, and you don't want to hit those speed bumps. So it's just trusting. And I have had to put my full trust in you, but we have developed that relationship where, I think even last year with Gasping for Air, I was like, can you just read it one more time? Like, I know it's going to cost, but for me to feel okay, I just needed that little extra reassurance. But I think everybody just has to come to that decision on their own and know that it's going to be published and you're going to want to change it. But it's okay if it's well received. And I think the biggest thing when I'm reading other people's work now, just make sure your copy, I mean, all your commas and quote marks and space, because that's for me one of the most difficult things as a reader. If it's not, if the grammar and the sentence structure and all those little details, I mean, I want to get the context of the story, but it's got to be good for the reader to read.
Mhm. All right. So you mentioned publishing. So we're not necessarily going to go into every step of that process that you had with us, but if you had to summarize just what is it like to publish your own work? It doesn't necessarily have to do anything with us, but just for other authors who might be thinking, because there are plenty of authors who are still torn between the appeal and the attraction of getting a traditional publishing contract versus really embracing that independent publishing journey. So if you had to just sum up, I don't know, your own experience as an author publishing her own work, how would you sum that up?
Oh, it's exhilarating. It's
Mhm.
just exhilarating because I think for me, I don't think people realize that. I think the last statistic I read was that point 0.3, not even 1%, 0.3% of all manuscripts are published. 0.3%. Imagine how many books are in the world that aren't published. So the fact that I've not only published a book, but that people are reading it, it's so humbling. And, without getting, I mean, you'll have to read all three of my books now, but, to understand my psyche is that I come from a background where I literally, not once at 48 years old, have either my mother or stepfather said they were proud of me. This was the one thing, and I was the overachieving kid, but this was the one thing that I was like, that a girl, you did it. You did
Mhm.
it. And I will speak this, of course, we all want traditional, we want the publisher to come to us and say, oh my goodness, you're the next big thing, let's publish your book and make it a New York Times bestseller. But with my story, I can only speak for me, it is my story. I did not want to give the control over the title of the book, the content of the book, the way the book was marketed or represented, or any aspect of it. When I have put that much, and I mean, I think I was writing and revising for 3 years, somewhere around there. I mean, even before I got with you, there was a year of writing, and to just hand that, all the rights of that, to somebody, I had a hard time with that. And I'm not controlling, but I wanted to be in control of my narrative and my story. So that was why I went the route of self-publishing, and I'm glad I did, because I needed the guidance. I have this very strong belief in anything in life, that do what you're good at. I'm good at writing and speaking and whatever. I've never published a book before. I've never copy edited a book before. Could I have just thrown it on Amazon like many people do? And, it would have been fine. But with that much effort, I wanted it to be right. And so that's when I, sought you out, and I did interview with I think probably 20 different companies, some traditional, some self-publishing. And when it came down to it, before anyone even responded, you were my number one, and I had a number two. And you and the number two both got in touch with me and said, if you want to proceed. But I was so thrilled it was you, because I think when you are self-publishing, it's like anything else. You don't just marry anybody, you marry somebody you connect with and you have that, you know, good energy with, so to speak. And I felt that with you. And again, trusting that my story was going to be told the right way and that you would help me get there, and you did. And we're doing that with number two and number three now, and it's been exhilarating to go through it. But I'm going to say, I do love when the writing part is over, when I can just say, this is the final manuscript, let's do the fun stuff now, let's like pick fonts and covers and all that other, the little
Of
details. But
course.
it's much more fun than, hoarding over a computer writing in the middle of the night.
Oh, you were saying before that people are reading it. So let's just talk briefly about that whole marketing process, or really connecting with readers, because marketing is definitely something that mystifies a lot of authors. And
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the things you've been doing to connect with those readers? And I know that, we've talked about this and you've mentioned just, and I always tell authors too, it's about consistency. You have to be
Yes.
consistent. You have to invest that time. And I know you've been investing it across a multitude of
Yeah.
aspects of marketing. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It has been literally a daily process. So another tidbit for authors, the average book all over the world and all time, the average book sells roughly 250 copies. So, we're not all going to be bestsellers. We're not all going to be New York Times bestsellers and sell 10,000 copies within the week or whatever it is. But you have to market it every day, because you know what? Your friends and family, or whoever it is, your support system, they're going to be so excited, and there's going to be a party, and you're going to have
Mhm.
a few book signings
Yeah.
maybe. And then it's like people forget about it, or they read it and it's done. And think about it, as a reader, we read a book, we're like, oh, that was good, or not, didn't like it so much. And you put it on your shelf and it gets
Yeah.
dusty, and that's it.
Yeah.
So you have to stay relevant. And if you want people to buy your book, which I would think if you write one and go through the whole process, that's the point. You have to do it every single day. And I didn't realize, because I think in the beginning I was like, oh, here and there, and throwing, kind of like, just throwing darts in the dark. And it doesn't work. It has to be consistent. So, the beautiful thing is, I am not a technical person, and before publishing this, that I was not on any social media, not
Yeah.
even personally. I wasn't on Facebook, no TikTok, no nothing. So now I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I am on LinkedIn, where I have found a lot of really good connections in my realm. And I am literally every single day, at least on the main platforms like Facebook and Instagram, posting every day. But there's this beautiful thing called artificial intelligence now, where you could actually like pre-post, like schedule. Sometimes I do a week in advance, like I have an hour slot today. I'm just going to schedule my posts for the next week, because if you stay in front of people, it will just take off. I struggled because, again, not being on social media at all, and nobody knew who I was. And then I'm using a pen name, not my real name. It was a little difficult. But getting people and asking people that, hey, can you share this? Can you follow me? And can you share this? But you have to do it every day. Again, gasping for air is just a little over a year out, every single day.
Right.
I am
Yeah.
not putting the cover of the book out there every day,
No.
but I am tapping into some aspect of the topic and making sure to hashtag the book and hashtag my name. And I'm fortunately at the point where I don't just have like 6 followers now. Like
Yes.
every day, I think yesterday I got a notification. I had like 29 new followers in the last
Nice.
whatever. And it's like, it's just doing its own thing now.
Yeah.
People are catching on. They see my posts, it's spreading. And it's just a matter of keep doing it. I ordered bookmarks. I didn't even think to do this, a year ago, but I ordered bookmarks. And you know what I do? When you go to the grocery store and you see the bulletin board,
Yeah.
stick one up there. When I go to the Ace Hardware to buy my husband batteries, stick it up there. People need to know about it. Otherwise,
Yes.
it gets forgotten in the multitude of books that are out there.
Yes, that is definitely very good advice. So it's all about consistency and a certain degree. You have to keep believing in your work, right? Because
Yes.
you were talking about the family and friends. I call that phase the F and F phase. So you've got your family and friends, and it's very much a honeymoon period. Like, oh, the book is
Yeah.
published. Everyone's excited for you. Everyone is sending you DMs or emails.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You might even have a book launch. But then, like you said, it pretty starkly fizzes out all of a sudden.
Oh,
And
yeah.
oh, now we have to keep things going, and that's going to be on me. I mean, certainly you can seek support like from people like us, but ultimately, especially in a memoir, it's so personal. The author has to be invested because the book is really an extension of you. So I think
Yeah.
that was all really, really good advice. And as you were talking about, we've got books 2 and 3 in the pipeline. So Dana Diaz's adventures continue. She will have upcoming memoirs published soon. And Dana, thank you so much for being part of the Write Publish Connect show. And we're going to keep our eyes out for your new books. Thank you so much.
Thank you.